All right, guys, we are live on Facebook, so we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to grab Dr. Johnston when he gets in here, and then we'll just kind of bring people in as they come. But we'll go ahead and kind of jump in, and then people can jump in as they would like to. So let's start with this. Let's start with a little introduction. Doug, do you want to just kind of introduce yourself and talk about what you do and kind of I'd love to hear. We want to get into this, but we were talking a little bit earlier that your church is reopening
Mm-hmm.
this Sunday. So I'd love for you to maybe talk about that some too, of how you guys are going about that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I wear a few different hats. One of them is I own a company called CSD, Custom Sound Design. So we're a design build firm that does audio, video, lighting, and acoustics for churches all across the country. I'm also a worship pastor at my church, which is Central Ministries here in Fort Wayne. I'm also author of the book Worship Unicorn. So
Wait.
I'm kind of,
Oh
oh,
yeah.
yay, look at
Oh
that.
yeah.
Good timing.
Thank you.
So yeah, I kind of live and breathe everything kind of worship and technology. So yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for hanging out. And I want to pick your brain on a lot of leadership stuff, but walk through, and you guys feel free to jump in if you have questions or whatever as we go. But maybe talk about about how you're reopening. So obviously, you're doing it a little bit different. Spreading seats out and doing the elbow greeting, and walk me through the process and maybe the meetings and how you guys came to that decision
Yeah.
and walk that out for me.
Yeah. Well, we're in Indiana. So every state is different, obviously, but we had last week, our governor gave some guidelines of how churches could meet, and how they could gather. And so we as a leadership team met on Saturday and talk through that. I mean, philosophically, obviously, everyone, probably all you guys too, we just can't wait to get back to church, right? Everyone's, I think, had enough of not meeting in person. So we're anxious to do that, but there's a lot of things that we've got to tweak. And so some of those things are, you've still got to do social distancing. So you've got to find a way for us to all get in this worship center together and try to stay 6 feet apart, right? So we're doing things with how we space the chairs and tables. If you're a family, you can still sit together with your family, but like if I come in by myself, then I've got to stay 6 feet apart from other people. So the social distancing is an interesting thing. We've got cleaning crews coming in between the services, to totally clean and sterilize everything. Of course, there's no meet and greet, which some people are really happy about, right? There's camps of people that love the meet and greet and camps that hate the meet and greet. So if you are a meet and greet hater, you're loving this time because at least temporarily the meet and greet is gone. Can't hand out any bulletins. So, bulletins are gone. What else? No choir. When you dismiss, we've got to dismiss in a way so that you don't have a big crowd of people, funneling down the hallway. Kids department is not meeting yet, again, just because of kids and germs. And on the other end of that spectrum, if you're 65 or older, those people are asked to stay home temporarily. So I think that's the main things. So again, it's that rub of, we want to get back together, we want to sing, we want to worship together, but we've got to do it in a way that's as safe as possible. So that's where we're at. We're actually opening up this weekend. So me personally, man, I can't wait. I'm tired of leading worship to a camera lens and not having eyeballs out there in the seats. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Are any of you guys reopening, or what's been the conversations?
We're starting our conversations pretty soon. But one of the things, when Doug was talking about, worshiping and singing, one of the things that we're considering is when we do start meeting in person in smaller groups, is we may not allow congregational singing. And that's because the doctors in our church have informed us that when you're singing, it projects your water droplets even further than when you would normally be talking, or if we do it, do we require everyone to wear masks while they sing? And so then the conversation becomes, if what we have to do to change worship to make it safe makes it kind of anticlimactic to come back, is it worth coming back right now? And so that's the question that we're struggling with as we come up with our plan. Fortunately, we have a few more weeks. We're still on a stay-at-home order, and then phase 1 for our order is just a relaxed stay-at-home order, so we're still not allowed to be in groups of 10 or more yet. So we've got a little bit of time, but that's one of the questions we're struggling with, is what do we do about singing when we get back to church?
Where are you at again, Jennifer?
Charlotte.
Oh, okay. Dan, were you going to say something? You guys have had little.
Yeah, so we're in Florida, which means that last Wednesday and starting today, our governor has announced what is phase 1 of our reopening the state, which is really just it is kind of the same, a relaxed stay-at-home order, no gathering in more than 10. He was very specific in saying that he's never said anything to churches about not meeting. And I appreciate that from a lot of different angles, but I also want to lead a Romans 13 church that we honor the government and their requests. And so we have been very hesitant to put any dates on anything that we're going to do. We're going to follow with phases from our governor and from our government, because we feel like for us, that's a way to handle it. Because personally, I think that we might end up finding that government kind of goes a little bit of back and forth, phase 1, phase 2, oh, we need to step back. And so we feel like if we deal with it in phases and communicate in phases, then we're not having to consistently change dates because something crazy has happened. And so we're going to set a standard of when the government is doing this, we're going to do this. And that way we can kind of follow along those lines. And we've got what I feel like is a fairly good plan. I actually made a statement in the staff meeting this morning. I'm tired of listening to what everybody else is doing. I want us to decide what we're going to do and just say, this is who we are, communicate it, and let our people know that this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts on reopening?
We've got stuff scheduled for reopening, but we're not really going super public with it yet. And I'm in the state of Kentucky. Our governor did ban church meeting, and then this week the courts got all involved. A lot of court cases went through, and so the governor backpedaled pretty heavily and announced that churches were allowed to meet again. But obviously we can't just jump right back into it. So, because like Dan said, we want to be respectful of reality and safety. And so we're taking a measured approach on coming back. So we won't be doing any children's ministry or anything like that for the first couple weeks.
Cool. All right, so let's kind of jump into some leadership topics here, and Dr. Johnston is going to hopefully join us here in a little bit to bounce through some stuff too. But I asked Doug to come on. Doug sees a lot of, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Doug. You're in a position where you've consulted a lot of worship leaders, especially, and written books to that, and are kind of you're a veteran in the worship leading space. So speak to the area of leading worship leaders. So how do we lead our leaders? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on that. I think one thing is that, like, we as leaders, it's easy to feel the pressure of like being really composed and having all of the answers. And it's okay if we don't. And I think it's actually a really good thing if we communicate to our teams when we don't know what's going on, and we're right in the middle of that right now, right? It's, sometimes we can come to them and say, here's a problem and we're working through the problem and here's my 5-step plan to work through this problem. And sometimes we don't know, or we don't know yet. And I know for me, like the best connections I've had with my teams, and the best like compliments I've received from them, is when I'm just transparent and raw with them, and just let them know, you know, here's what I know, here's what I don't know. And so I think if we can be real with them when we don't have the answers, they appreciate that. If we can be transparent with them when we don't have the answers, they appreciate that. And we need to realize that we are leading people that are in very different places, emotionally and not spiritually, mentally, I guess. Meaning just how they feel about this whole thing, right? We've got really far-ranging extremes of how people feel during this time. You know, there's some people that would say this is all unnecessary and it's silly and let's just get back to normal. That's kind of one extreme. And you would have others on the other side that would be like people that actually have this virus and have been sick, or know people that have died, and people that have weak immune systems, and they're genuinely afraid, you know, of what's going on. And every, you know, there's this huge wide spectrum and so many points in between that of where people are at. And so we've got to lead all those people somehow. And I think we need to, in some cases, adapt or speak to those people differently depending on, you know, where they're at, how they view this whole thing. And so when we lead our worship teams and our congregations, I think we need to lead them with comfort, you know, and with assurance. You know, again, not that we have all of the answers, but we've got a few, right? And we, as leaders, we know a few good things that we can reassure people with and comfort them with. I mentioned that our church is opening this weekend, so I've already been thinking about, you know, songs and things that I'm going to talk about this weekend. And one of the things is Isaiah 41:10, you know, that says, "Fear not, for I am with you," right? Short, tiny little verse. Now we can take that verse and I could expound that into 14 points, or I could just leave it as is, you know, leave it uncomplicated. God is with us, fear not, you know. And sometimes I think we take things and we make it so complicated, or we try to make it so creative or clever or impressive. And I think a lot of times that it's good just to not overcomplicate it, you know, just to throw that verse out there, let it sit, let it go and do what it's going to do over people. And it will provide comfort. It will provide assurance to them. And so just things like that, you know, the question of how do we lead, for me, that's one way, just to be simple, be raw, be honest. You know, if you're feeling great and you've got some inspiration, share that. You know, if you are feeling terrified and unsure and you're clueless of how to move forward, then share that. You know, I think people respond to us when we're real, and just let them see who we really are.
What about as it pertains to worship teams or band specifically?
Yeah, band specifically, I would say all of the above that we just said. But like in fact, I just had conversations today with some of my team. So at a real practical level, you need to talk to people about, you know, who is comfortable coming back. You know, who feels like, hey, they're ready and it's no big deal. Who is not ready? You know, who is, and like in our case in Indiana, if you are over 65, you're asked to stay home. You know, so I have people on my team that are over 65. You know, so I talked to one of those people today, you know, and he's going to stay home for a while. But I think it's way deeper than the age. The age thing is pretty easy to define. I think it's for us as leaders, it's about being sensitive to who is ready to come back. And if they're hesitant at all, you know, if hopefully you have other people that you can rotate through for a while. Or you may still be leading worship on your own. You may still be leading with a small band. You may be doing acoustic. You may be doing, you know, like when we talked to Steve this morning, you're doing the virtual choir, the virtual band, putting all that stuff together on video. That's great. You know, we have more options today to create worship than ever before, right? We've got lots of options, and technology is one of those options. So I think it's it's just being in touch with your team, talking to them and seeing how they're feeling, how they're coping with all this, and just trying to lead them through personally. And I think probably every little cube on this screen, we would probably answer that question slightly different. And that's okay. That's us leading, and that's us knowing our people and trying to lead them through this time.
DeAndre, you might be able to speak to this too. Are you seeing that you have less positions or less opportunities for your worship and band members, or more? Like how are you plugging them into serving through this time?
I think we're keeping it pretty consistent. Right now we're recording and everyone's using software, and then we mix it all together. Or I'll meet with one person at the studio at the church to track their part, and then we mix it together. So people have really appreciated just the opportunity to say, hey, will you come and join me? We've tried to keep a different rhytm, not offering the same thing every week, just because we have a little bit of resources. So this week it was virtual choirs. 2 weeks ago, I brought in 2 members with me, 2 vocalists and the piano. A few weeks ago, it was piano and acoustic guitar and pads. But just trying to use that diversity to multiply. But I found that when we allow people to engage with us, that they really enjoyed that. And one of the things we tried that I heard last week was having your team create those watch parties. And so yesterday, instead of our first impressions team, which I've been encouraging, hey, we have to do more, I just told the worship arts team, like, take the ground. And so it was very funny to see throughout our services that they were very engaged that way, and just being host, because I just tell them we're all congregational worship leaders, whether we're singing or on the stage or in the tech booth. And so it's really great just to be able to empower them and just say it's different, but they're eager to come back and to help.
Good. Anybody else want to speak to the topic of leading your leaders, like leading your core volunteer team, your core worship leaders? You know, some of you guys are senior pastors, your worship leaders at your churches. How have you led your core team? Not all at once.
Carl, I'm a student pastor technically, but and as many roles, we have a bunch of different hats, and not just because I'm a hat collector, but one of mine is really just helping us engage social media and technology. Like our church was kind of anti-social media before all this happened, just because we really valued that in-person contact and like seeing each other. But when that's taken away, it's really forced us to, do we really care about each other? So I've equipped all of our community group leaders with challenges to do just every week, to go do something with your group. Don't just, because the Zoom thing, I think I talked about this last week with you guys. The Zoom thing is kind of getting with people. I mean, there's kind of like I'm so anti-screen. I don't even want to meet. I don't even want to do it. But we're encouraging them to come on campus and do parking lot picnics. We're encouraging them to come on campus and maintain your social distancing. We've got a bunch of property field around us. Pull up in your cars and make sure you use social distancing. The church isn't available for bathrooms or things like that. So we're kind of just equipping our community group leaders to go do this stuff on their own and don't wait for permission. And and to be honest, our job as pastors is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. It's not to tell them and give directives, but it's to let them do the work themselves.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Doug, I know me and you have talked some about stories and the importance of using stories and testimonies especially in a worship set. So it's not just you're up there leading songs. You're tying in, stories that from your congregation members and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
walk me through how you're doing that now. Give me a sense of leading through stories.
Yeah, I love what Jeff just said about the whole screen stuff. You know, people are people are tired of this, what we're doing right now, but we kind of have to do it right now, right? So I think it's a season. I think it'll continue afterwards as a kind of a supplement to what we do. It'll never replace the real FaceTime, which we all love. But to answer that question, I'm thinking about last week. We do, you know, like most churches, we're broadcasting all of our services online, and they're going to our website and they're going to our Facebook stream live. And so when I was leading last week, this is something new that we probably didn't do before. You know, I'm thinking, you know, how did we used to share our testimony, right? If you guys grew up, like I remember growing up in a small church. I go to a big church now. But one of the things in small churches and medium churches was you used to be able to pass around the microphone and you'd give testimonies, right? Or you'd do prayer requests. And that was one of the great things about small church. Well, as you grow or as you get more complicated or both of those things, sometimes that goes away, right? It's not feasible to kind of have an open mic, or you don't know what's going to happen if somebody's going to grab the mic and they're going to talk for a half an hour, you know, instead of just telling God one little thing that you're thankful for, so right, your whole service can derail. So there's all kinds of reasons why we don't do that anymore. But so last week I'm leading, and I was leading the song "Goodness of God," which is an awesome song. And I thought, well, hey, why don't we just, you know, let people share a testimony of why they think God is good, or what He has done that's good in their life. And you can do that on the Facebook stream, you know. And so I'm looking directly into the camera and I'm telling people, hey, if you have always been scared to death your whole life of picking up a microphone and, you know, talking out loud about how God is good or why you're thankful or any of that kind of stuff that's a testimony, here's your chance, right? You don't have to pick up a mic. You don't have to speak. You just have to be on your little keyboard and you can type that. And so I set that up during the song. I said, hey, just type in something that you're thankful for, or some reason that God is good, or something good that God has done in your life. And people are doing that live. So that's cool, you know, and all the people at the church, not to mention people that are checking out your church, now all of a sudden they're seeing a stream of testimonies, you know, and that is good for your church. You know, all the people in your church are seeing that. But we're also living in an age now where more people are checking out our churches than ever before, right? I talk to people that are watching 3 and 4 church services every Sunday morning. They're just, you know, it's easier now to church hop than ever before, right? You used to have to sneak around, you know, and you'd have to skip your church and go to the church down the street to check it out, right? Everybody can church hop every week and do it at the same time to multiple churches. And people are doing that right now. And so it's cool to see that kind of thing happening. And so I'm leading the song, "Goodness of God." And in my worship team, the whole virus thing hit pretty close to home, because we had one of our singers actually got the virus. And she got really sick. She was actually on a ventilator. She died for a few minutes and was resuscitated, came back. But during this whole thing, her leg got really infected, and they had to amputate one of her legs below the knee. So imagine that happening, and as bad as that is, compounded with that, you're all alone, right? So her daughter cannot be with her. Nobody can be in the room. You get sick, you almost die, you're on a ventilator, you wake up, you know, one of your legs is gone, you know, and you had nobody with you that whole time. So that's one of my worship team members. So she, one of her favorite songs is "Goodness of God." In fact, she led it one time at our church. So guess who is in there typing a testimony to "Goodness of God" in real time about how good God is? She is doing that. That's awesome. You know, our worship team is seeing that. Our church is seeing that. People that are checking out our church are seeing that. And she was there testifying that God is good. You know, that's some pretty good stuff right there. So I think we as leaders, that's just one little tool that we have now, is if you are streaming live to Facebook or any platform that has comments in it, as you're leading, as you're leading the people that you're used to that are normally sitting in that room, just be mindful of where they are and how they can participate. Because again, there are people that are scared to death of sharing a testimony of any kind, and they'll probably go through their whole life and they would never speak, right? Never speak out loud in your church, but they would type a few words on the keyboard and they would say how good God is. And in that moment, I mean, your church wins, that person wins, they're taking, that might be a monumental step for that person. But they are sharing their testimony, right? And that's part of how we overcome, right? By the blood of the Lamb, word of our testimony. So that's just a quick thing. And I love to see that. I love to see people sharing in new ways.
Have you guys seen, and maybe to speak to that, maybe people are more open to doing a testimony on their cell phone or typing their testimony in. Have you guys incorporated testimonies into your worship experience? Maybe Chris Wilson or Ian, you're new to the group. Welcome. I don't know if you guys want to speak to that. Have you guys used testimonies at all in your online worship experiences?
We have, and like Doug said, with the risk of quality control, we will pre-film testimonies ahead of time just to try to, not only for the quality control, but just for time constraints, just try to keep everything within that time frame. But we've been doing the live streams, or not, well, in our live streams, the testimonies during announcements or like just above the message bumper. We'll put it right in there. But I love what you're doing, Doug. I just was texting one of our guys saying, hey, during the announcements or live streams, why not, throw a little tidbit in there? That's genius.
Yeah, it's great. I like to think that it's, maybe that's just a microscopic baby step for that person to someday, when they come back in person, now they've done something maybe they've never done their whole life. And they've taken that little tiny nudge, and maybe someday they might give a testimony in person, or maybe they let you videotape their testimony, or maybe they might share a prayer request, or any of that stuff. And it's a little tiny baby step, but sometimes those first baby steps are the hardest, right? So I love seeing people progress like that.
John Mark, do you have something?
Yeah, Doug, so our church was preparing to live stream when all this happened, so it was perfect timing. As you're leading worship and we start transitioning to in the room and live, but we know that a lot of people who want to be there in the room can't be, so like you're at risk, right? How does that change the way you are engaging? Because you're going to have almost a split focus between talking to the online audience versus talking to the in room. I know bigger churches have broadcast campuses for that, but I'm interested in how you're balancing that.
Yeah, the short answer is I don't know, because we've never done it before. But I can tell you what I'm thinking for this weekend, because I talked about that with our pastor team on Saturday. My intent is to go a little deeper than we normally do with welcoming the people that are online. There's a difference between saying, hey, welcome to church, and if you're watching online, we welcome you here today. No big deal. It's okay. It's not the most warm and fuzzy thing ever. But this week, I know that not only will there be people watching online because they're camping, or they're at the lake, or they're sick, or whatever. I know there are people watching online because they have to, and they've been told they can't come to church. So that's a different dynamic. So for those people, I think I just want to say, hey, we're here. We're so happy to be back in church. And we know there are some of you that are just itching to get back here and you just can't right now. We are so glad that you're out there watching. And I'd like to, even if we can, try to take a live shot of the room, just kind of, panning the congregation. So those people at home are not just looking at me on camera, but they can see their friends that are in church. you know. And so I want to take it deeper and try to connect with those people. And again, not just say, hey, thanks for watching, but like, we know you can't be here. We know it's killing you. We want you back. You know, we're gonna try to connect with you the best that we can. We don't know if this is gonna be a week, 2 weeks, 10 weeks. We don't know. But as long as they are there and they want to be here at church, you know, I want to know that we honor them and we miss them. So that's the intent. I can let you know next week how that goes, but that's the intent.
Dan, I saw you in the chat. You said you guys have been doing this.
Yeah. So first of all, I would say one way, just that I was thinking, Doug, you know, I think one of the things that you have an opportunity to do is maybe in some ways what you're doing on social media is you're engaging maybe non-singers. I mean, so I'm a preacher, so I'm a pastor, all cards on the table. But I was a worship pastor, and I've thought about, so I really love music, but I find that when I'm watching a service online at home, I am not standing up in my living room singing at the top of my lungs like I am when I'm sitting on the front row. It's just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel the same. And so one of the things that we started doing this week was we started basically putting some online prompts with our music. I was already doing it in the sermon. So some, you know, hey, in the chat, do this, in the chat, you know, mention this or answer this question. But like we sang Raise a Hallelujah this week. And so we just said, you know, hallelujah means to give praise to God. What's something you're praising God for today? We sang Do It Again that talks about God's faithfulness. What is one way that you've seen God's faithfulness through this season? And so you're still going to have non-singers when you come back to church. I mean, there are people that stand there and they don't sing. And so if you have an opportunity to say, if you're online, you can put this in chat, but even if you're here in the room, as we're singing this together, let's focus on the ways that God has been faithful to us. And so there's opportunities for people, maybe not to verbally testify in a room, but to kind of have a mindset behind, oh, that's what we're singing about. Now that makes a lot of sense, you know? So now they're not just standing there waiting for the music to be over because they're not singers. They're actually engaged with what's happening, even though they may not be verbally singing because they just don't like the sound of their own voice. You know, they're embarrassed or whatever, but now they're engaged. And I think there's an opportunity for us to do that more.
That's a great, I would love to dig a little deeper in that. And here's what I mean. I've heard some people talk about that, the dynamic of like when we're standing in a room with 50 people, 500 people, 2,000 people, and we're singing, that's a certain dynamic. If the church closes and we capture that same band, the same production, the same everything, and then we pump it into your living room and you're standing there with just your wife, totally different, right? Totally different. And so I, like at our church, we have always kind of, I've tried to avoid big, long segments of music, you know, where there's not something going on, because I feel like that's a disconnection with the congregation. But I think now, if you magnify that now, it's even more true, right? If we go on these long solos of any kind, or just we stretch things out and you're not singing, then to me, I picture a couple people in their living room or in their car just kind of looking at each other going, what do I do now, right? Because it's a different dynamic. So I think you know, some churches are doing services shorter, or they're doing less music, or doing the music a little bit different. But I'd love to hear from any of you guys that are maybe doing music different, or thinking about it different. Just it's all under the banner of engagement, you know. And how do we maybe adjust things for people that are in their homes that are watching this?
We actually started something new this past Sunday because of that, where we had the full band, then we dialed it down just to a singer and acoustic guitar. Then we dialed it down to pre-made, you know, post-edited videos. Now this Sunday we shifted worship to the end, because like you said, people are church hopping, people are coming, just they want you know, the goods right up front.
Yeah.
So we took, I believe it was Central Church in Vegas, We used their worship. They opened up all their worship videos, which are really well polished. We used their resources and put it at the end of our live stream. So far, I haven't heard any feedback. I've been calling people this morning in the church saying, "Hey, how did everything go? What did you like? What didn't you like?" Kind of just doing like a focus group type thing on it.
Yeah, I think the thing we need to realize is this is ironic, but it's it's easier than ever for people to connect with our churches, right? To find us and to be connected and to be engaged. But at the exact same time, it's easier than ever to hit the stop button, right? I'm out. So like I watched our stream last week, and I watched our format is we used to do a gathering song and then kind of a welcome and the sermon. I'm sorry, gathering song, a welcome, then like the bulk of the main worship set, sermon, closing song. Well, we got rid of the gathering song because there's no reason, they're already there, right? But what's interesting to watch on our stream is we have the welcome and we do like a pre-roll video that they shoot. We do the main worship set, do the sermon, and engagement is pretty good during that time. As soon as the sermon is over and pastor says amen and we go to that last song, it's almost 50%. They're out, And so I think we just need to realize that, attention spans are shorter, and it's hard to hang on to people for a long time. And I'm okay with that. I mean, as worship leader, I'm okay with that for now. But I think that's just something that we need to, I think, kind of look in the mirror and realize that, hey, if we don't do as much stuff as we did before, or if it's not as long as it was before, that's okay.
Let me rabbit trail for a second. So, because I know, is DeAndre? Yeah, DeAndre had a question about Facebook. Let me pose that to the group. So, do you guys leave your Facebook stream up, or do you have it expire? Do you just archive it? Is there anybody that removes? And correct me, DeAndre. Are you asking if people remove their worship experience at a certain point? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm just curious. We normally do that on an average weekend when we're all together, just for the simple fact that we want people to engage while we're in that hour, versus it's just the cop out just to miss church or not to engage with us on site. And so that's kind of the thing where we were just leaving it up and we saw people say, "Oh, it's just easy. We're already running late, so let's not go." So we just expire after each of our services. So as we've transitioned throughout COVID, we do the same exact thing. And then we rebroadcast later on at night at 6:00, where there's less interaction, but just to keep people engaged. I just wondered if any other churches were doing that.
So we were doing exactly the same thing. We used to archive programs immediately after Sunday services. But what we found out during this time is that there are people who, for one reason or the other, can't attend the service at the time that we broadcast it. And when we've started leaving it on, we see more viewership at different times of the day. So whenever it's convenient with them, they come back, they know it's there, they go, they watch it. So we started leaving it there now for longer. What we do is we leave it for the week. By the next week, next time we have the next service, like the next Sunday, then we take it down and put the new one out there. So that worked out for us.
We do we help Seeds Family Worship. I think I mentioned this before. Do a children's service, and each week they have a certain number of people watching live. Like they had maybe 3,000 or 5,000 people watching live, but through the week they gained another 20,000 views just by leaving it up for people to catch it whenever. So I mean, it was quadruple the amount of people that actually watched when they left it up as opposed to when they had it expire.
Is it ongoing, like just available at, because we keep it up on our website. So after the last service of the day, it's available at mountainpark.org/online. So when we rebroadcast, we see that people go back and watch it, but just to just to kind of keep people engaged. Like, and we even asked just in a basic poll, like, hey, is this helpful to you? Because we were just thinking, then why are we doing multiple services at multiple time if we're just keeping it available? And how do we keep, our congregation just engaged? And we kind of found that the trend that we went up as we took it down, that people were more like, we keep the chat available. It's available for 15 minutes after service where they can hang out with the pastor. So if I'm the host pastor that day, how can I be praying for you? What did you learn for the day? We get a lot of engagement, but then we tell them, hey, this chat is going to end, and then we're going to open up our 9:30 at XYZ. But my pastor was just curious, should we just leave him up? I don't have a preference either way. It was good for me to kind of poll the group to see if anyone else was doing that.
I can say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We have, my church, we have a Friday night service, and we have 3 on Sunday. And we pull everything down until the services are happening, and then we post them. And the reason why for us, the Friday is an interesting dynamic, because if we do our services Friday night at 6:30, so we'll broadcast that live. If we leave it there, our concern is it lessens the incentive to tune in on Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. And so our people really like if you go to the 9 o'clock service, they want to turn their tablet on at 9 o'clock and have church, right? Now, they could still consume it Friday night at midnight or Saturday morning at 10 o'clock or 11, you can consume it whenever. But there's a lot of them that really want to keep that ritual. Hey, I go to church at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. That's when I'm going to turn my computer on. Or I go to church at 11 o'clock Sunday morning. That's when I'm going to turn my computer on. And so we do those live. As soon as it's done, it's gone. After they've all been posted live, then it's theirs for people to consume later. And Carl's right. Far more people will consume it later than do live. So that's good. For me, I think if we throw it out there for free early, it decreases the reason for you to tune in when you really had church, and I think this is a time where it's super important. The more normalcy and routine we can give to people, the better. I know for me as a leader, we were talking about this earlier, we record our services on Tuesday night. So I go in on Tuesday night, I record the worship set, and it's good, it's fine. Then on the weekend, I don't know what to do with myself, right? Sunday morning comes. What is Sunday? I'm not standing in a church. I'm not leading worship. It's weird. And so my routine is totally gone. And so I think for the congregation, the more that anything we can do that gives them their routine or keeps their routine intact in a small way, I think is a good thing for them. So that's what we do.
I like that that Sunday is kind of an event. And DeAndre, I don't think it's bad for you to put it in your archive, /online Monday through Saturday or whenever that is. You might try to do a random event on Facebook or put it live on Facebook on a Tuesday or something like that, just for fun. You might try that and see if it works. Hey, check out, we're going to do our service from Tuesday at 2 p.m. if anybody wants to check it out, just for fun. But yeah, making an event on Sunday and then archive it Monday through Saturday. Did that help you there, or is there something that we're not answering?
No, thanks.
Awesome. Okay, let's kind of switch gears, and we got about 15 minutes or so left. Let's talk about leading our support staff and volunteers. I think we hit on this a few weeks ago, but I'd love to kind of dive into it a little bit more. And I think we talked about it a few minutes ago, but how are you, this is different than your core team. Okay. Your core team is like, you're a senior pastor and you're leading your worship leader. How do you lead your core staff? Now I'm shifting more to like, your volunteers, your I'm going to say lower on the totem pole people, but your volunteers and support staff. Do you guys have any way that you have engaged them, led them, Dan, you want to speak to that first?
Yes, so we actually just had a conversation about this in our Monday staff meeting, and the conversation centered around the fact that typically Sundays are always coming, Wednesdays are always coming, and it is so hectic. That pace is so hectic, and we feel like what we've been granted is an opportunity to do some mentoring, some on-the-job training, some side-by-side leadership, and introducing some new people to new opportunities to serve where it's hard to train them on a Sunday morning. I mean, you got to get the job done then. And so training is basically, oh, just watch me. They're clueless what you're doing, but just watch me. And so we just had a conversation about, we want to be very intentional about doing some mentoring and some clear feedback loop, because we're still in an online service only mode, but with our relaxing of the stay-at-home order, we can now have more people in the building, which means we can, legally and responsibly have more people standing side by side, and actually, train some of our camera operators with somebody standing right beside them, train some of our audio mixers and all of those different areas. And then even all the way down to our student ministry, children's ministry, our first impressions team. We're going to use this kind of transition time. The reset button has already been hit. We just need to take advantage of it. So it's we feel like there's an opportunity here to do some training with our kind of front level volunteers.
Good. Dr. J, what's up, man?
Hey, how are you, Carl? I'm embarrassed to say apparently we had a time zone problem. So not only did I join late, but I missed all the good stuff too.
No. The good stuff's just starting now that you're here. That's it. Well, let me catch you up. So I just kind of posed the question about volunteers, and this is a sweet spot for you, man. So I would love for you to jump in and talk about how we're firing up our volunteers during this time. How do we lead our volunteers and support staff well through this period?
Oh, wow. Well, big general question there. Hey, tell me, just so that I'm keeping track of things, what sort of time are we working with?
We probably got 15, 20 minutes or so.
Okay. Well, I apologize, folks. Apparently I had the time zones wrong. So I thought, we were starting at 12:30. I am happy to talk a little bit about volunteers. I'm not sure really where to begin on that. So let me throw out a couple things I find myself talking with pastors that are clients in coaching sort of scenarios. Let me mention a couple of those things and then see if that's something that you can relate to, or that you have other questions or comments or even wisdom to share about. I think what I'm discovering in any context is that when you're in crisis, a couple different forces start acting on leaders that are not in the best interests of how they lead and support and empower their volunteers and their team members. It's just something about the nature of crisis or unusual times. The first thing is that it tends to make leaders self-centered. I don't mean selfish by any means. I just mean that because leaders are so keenly aware of what they need to do and how much is relying on them and their choices and all, there's something about the nature of crisis that can really pull that down and kind of make it tunnel vision, so that leaders are very aware of like their own experience. And it's tough to remember in the midst of that all the people that you're working with have different experiences. In fact, sometimes the more responsible you feel and the more determined you are to do a good job taking care of people and leading them, the more it's tempting to view everybody's experiences as extensions of your own, or at least more common than they really are. And so one of the things I'd say is you got to be around and in touch with people. You've got to kind of stop doing a lot of the work that feels like it's on your to-do list and spend more time getting in touch with the individuals you lead at a very personal one-on-one level, kind of know where they are. If they're volunteers, this is especially important because volunteers are run by their sense of commitment to the cause and connection to that. And this gives you a chance to understand where they are personally and all. But I'd say you got to fight that need to really get focused on the things on your plate, and instead try to be present and focused on other people and what's on their plate. And I've got to admit, for me personally, and for many of the leaders that I work with, this is kind of counterintuitive, because it feels like it's not as productive as some of the stuff that you're supposed to be doing at any given moment. So that's one of the big things I'd mention. The second one is that times of crisis tend to make leaders try to solve problems. You know, they look out there and they try to get the job done all the time. They try to move in and get things taken care of. It seems like it's the best thing that they can do at the time, but it's not the best way to empower your volunteers or your teams you're with, because often that means that you're going to roll up your sleeves and get busy, and you do heroic things like you're willing to stay late and work long and do all the hard work yourself, which is admirable. But in a strange way, that tends to marginalize team members, especially volunteers, because they want to feel useful. They want to feel significant. And one of the best things you can do to make volunteers feel powered up during times of crisis is to give them a sense of volition, like they matter and like they can make a difference, because it makes them have something they feel like they can control in the midst of something that's uncontrollable. And so again, I'm just mentioning that because this is one that sneaks up on all of us in leadership roles, is that when things get really hectic and there's a lot riding on it, we tend to get busy trying to solve the problems, when in reality, we should step back and ask somebody else to solve it, or walk alongside them and help them be strong enough to make a difference, rather than making the difference ourselves. And that can be hard on us, because we want to be in control as much as anybody else. But if you really want to know how to strengthen and kind of fuel your team members, especially volunteers during this time, you have to make them feel like they have some power, some volition and choice in the midst of weird times like this. So I don't know, let me just throw those two out. I just mentioned them because they're particularly sneaky. They'll come up on your blind side and you'll feel like you're being very leaderly and wonder why the people around you are disconnecting or a little less committed than you want them to be. I'm curious, does that hit any of the experiences that you're having?
One thing I think of when you talk about that is kind of the balance of leading people, maybe just pastoring people personally, and as a volunteer, maybe you have some volunteers that have lost their job, and then maybe some volunteers who are working way overtime.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, have you guys seen that, like a balance of having to minister a different way to different people? John Mark, speak to that.
Well, we just have a lot of different personality types. I know there's a lot of different personality tests. We use Enneagram at our church, and color code and all those other fun ones. And often, a lot of the times, who want to be tech volunteers are not necessarily people persons. And so working with that dynamic has been good. Even myself, my most greatest broadcast switcher guy, so we butt heads sometimes on style, and at the end of the day, I still have to answer to my leadership. And so working through that, finding ways to communicate on an individual level is hard, especially I have a 30-member team that rotates around. So I have to remember, I can tell so-and-so it this way, but on this person, I need to open up with like 3 compliments before I say, hey, is there any way you can tweak that just slightly? Whereas my other guys, it's like, hey, you know better than that. Don't do that. And they're like totally cool with it. So, yeah.
Anybody else run into that, pastoring people?
I love what John Mark is saying there, because it reminds me of what sometimes you hear people say, that if you're going to lead well, you have to play chess, not checkers. Meaning that, like, people aren't interchangeable. Like in checkers, they have particular talents and sometimes particular stressors, like chess pieces. So if you want to play the game well, you've got to treat each of them according to who they are. I'll be honest with you. I keep a little list beside me where it's sort of my cheat sheet, especially if you've got 30 people that are rotating around anything. it's really easy to adopt like a one-size-fits-all style of leading just because you're having pressures too. And I keep a cheat sheet where I have people's names and I just keep some key facts about them. Sometimes it has to do with their talent. Sometimes it has to do with the things that especially stress them out and all. These days, sometimes it has to do with what they're living through, because you're right. Some people actually are working from home, but it's created tons more stress. Now, you might not be seeing that necessarily in the same way, but they're having stress because all their boundaries disappeared and they're working more than ever and all. Or if you're suddenly shifting your church to all kinds of online ministries, there's a huge like startup and challenge in that. Other people are feeling the pressure because they've lost jobs, or maybe their spouse or other people have lost jobs. So those are totally different stressors and might affect the way you present things or when you present them and all. And, you know, don't feel like you should guess at that, or like you just got to be remembering that. You might just take a minute and jot down people's names that you're trying to lead and support well or pastor well, and jot some of those down so you play chess, not checkers.
Yeah. All right, let's shift topics just a little bit. I want to get Doug back in here on this one. Let's talk worship for a minute. And this might, you might be a pastor, you might be a communications guy, but can take this for your team. And guys like DeAndre, this might be right in your wheelhouse. So, Doug, let me just pitch this to you. How do you find the right songs for this moment? Is the set list like a normal set list, or has anything changed in how you select songs and lead people in worship?
I think for me personally, it's relatively the same. And what I mean by that is I think that sometimes as creative people, we can feel the pressure to tie in a song to whatever the topic of the moment is. You know, I know like the first week that we were recording online, you know, I'm like, well, I've got to talk about the virus or fear, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And you can, sometimes it's too obvious. You know, I look at it's like kind of like, you know, we have Father's Day. Like, I don't like to sing Good Father on Father's Day. You know, it's too obvious. So for me, I'm trying to keep things relatively normal. And I loved what Dan said about the visual of the person that's in their living room with their hands folded, you know, and not singing. That's the guy I'm trying to reach. That is the person, because I know that person, and I know that they normally stand in the church with their arms folded. They're probably less likely to sing now that they're at home, like we already talked about. But that's the one I'm trying to reach, you know, and we want to do creative things to reach those people. But some of those people just think that singing is goofy, right? It's not needed. It's not valuable. Why do we do this? You know, I sing Happy Birthday maybe a couple times a year and that's it, right? I don't need to sing. And we that are in the business, I can't imagine not singing. I can't imagine not having music playing all the time, but that's not how everybody is wired. And so one of the things that I try to do to reach those people, to engage with them, is story, you know, and you guys probably know how important stories are, but I think it's especially important to those people that just don't like music, right? Like we're probably afraid to even say that out loud, that there are people that just don't like music. Or if they like music, they don't like the kind that we do Sunday mornings, right? They've got music that's way cooler than what we're doing. We think we're pretty cool. They would say our music is lame, right? That's just reality. But I can tell a story and I can hook that guy into the conversation. And I just did this last week. And if you'll indulge me, I can kind of share an example of that. So we had, you know, just a regular worship set. I was leading into this next song, and you know, sometimes in worship music, familiar is good, right? You do a song that everybody knows, and you nod your head, and you're like, yes, I love this song. I don't have to think about it. I know the melody, I know the words, and I just enjoy it, and I go along, right? And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing. Familiar things can be a bad thing because you tend to just go on autopilot on the melody You know the lyrics, you know the melody, you can sing it probably pretty good, but your brain and your soul has no idea what's going on in that moment. No idea. And that's why I hate the familiar. And so sometimes when we're going to do a song that's familiar, like the one that we did last week, I will tell a story about it. And so this song, the kind of the way I set it up was, the song is written by a terrible person. We don't usually say that in church, right? We would talk about how talented the composer is and all the good things that they did in life and the obstacles they overcome. This guy was a terrible person. He was an awful, awful person. It says he had terrible language. He caused trouble. He was on a ship. He actually wrote songs to make fun of the captain of his ship. So think about that for a minute. Whoever your boss is, you're writing songs to make fun of your boss. Probably not a good thing. So he was on a ship. He traded slaves. He got in fights. He became a slave himself for a period of time. And one night on this ship, things got really bad. He thought he was going to die. And he prays to God and he says, "Have mercy on me." And God did. And he survived, but he didn't change, right? So sometimes we make these deals with God and we say, "Hey, if you'll save me from this, I'll live my whole life for you and I'll be a missionary and I'll go wherever. Just, come through for me, God." Well, this guy, God came through for him and he didn't change. He eventually did, but he didn't that night. And so this guy, he continued to write poetry. He wrote obscene poems. Okay, so that's something else that I said from my keyboard Sunday. I said, this guy wrote obscene poetry. Now, I guarantee you, I have everybody's attention in that moment. When I say the writer of this song wrote obscene poetry, he later changed that, wrote good poetry, wrote good hymns, but he used a word that we don't use too much anymore, and he used the word wretch. He said he was a wretch. He was terrible, did all this kind of bad stuff, but he said that God could redeem him, a wretch. God could forgive all of his sins. He was a wretch. This song that is familiar, it's sung 10 million times every year. Not like in all time, but every year it's sung 10 million times. It's been recorded on albums 11,000 times. So everybody knows this song. But I'm also convinced that most of the world has no idea what this song is about. They know the words, they know the melody, they sing it, but they miss it. That song is Amazing Grace. Okay, so we sang that song, but I guarantee you, I got people's attention and they know what that song is about. And there's somebody out there that can say, "Man, that guy was bad. I thought I was bad. God saved him. Maybe God can save me." That's story. That's different than me just sitting down and saying, "We will now sing Amazing Grace."
Yeah.
That's the power of
Can I
story.
connect that to the last statement too, just to help kind of say amen to that?
Sure.
We were just talking about how hard it is to stay really personal when you've got a congregation full or a team full of very individual situations with individual problems and individual things. A story is a perfect mechanism to speak directly to people, because rather than, like Doug said, presenting something that's so familiar, a story gets in and it hits people like no other medium does. When they've tested this in the research facilities with what they call PET scans, and that they put electrodes all over your head and it measures what part of your brain is firing electronically at certain times. And the fascinating thing is that when people listen to a story, a good story, like the way Doug did, and in fact, I bet you all felt this even when he was saying that, at least I did. When you look at their brains, the parts of their brain are firing as if they were the participant in the story. And so the point is, and I think this is why Jesus used parables and everything so much as well, because people aren't as defensive or they don't look at these things objectively. When you tell a story, it just comes in under all of that, right to the heart of who they are. You might even be shocked that you tell one story and like 6 people took something totally different but equally personal away from it. So more power to you, Doug. That's great advice.
Yeah. That reminded me of a couple other things. Or one little piece of advice for worship leaders. It's good for us to tell stories, but it's not our job to preach a sermon. Okay. Dan might give you an amen, right? Can I get an amen? Yeah, testify, right? So that's something that we need to keep in mind. Like, it's, we've got our little chunk of time in the service, and however long that is, it is. If we tell a little 2-minute, 3-minute story, those are great. You go on for 10 minutes, man, you're derailing, and there's a fine line between telling a story that supports the song that you're coming out of or going into, and all of a sudden you're just the pastor. And you've got a pastor, you've got somebody that's preaching before you, after you, whenever. Let them do the sermon. It's great for us to sometimes I'll call them worship bombs. It's great to drop a worship bomb, move on, but don't be talking for 12 minutes, 15 minutes, anything like that. But one quick little thing about telling stories, and this is not about worship, but the power of story. So in this whole virus thing, I've got time on my hands that I didn't before. So when I get bored, I do weird things. So I started shooting videos in the morning and posted them on Facebook. And again, they're like 3 5-minute videos. And what I've been doing when you mentioned the parables is I'm just kind of retelling some parables in my own language. And a few weeks ago, no joke, I went out to a local park here in my area, like 7:30 in the morning. And I'm pretty obvious because I have my camera. I'm talking to myself. I've got my camera on a gimbal, so I'm holding this thing out in front of me, walking around. And there was nobody in this place when I arrived. And all of a sudden, I hear this, "Hey, you're the Facebook man." And there was a guy there was a worker in the parks department that came out and saw me and had seen my videos. And again, they're just silly little things of me talking about just Bible stuff. But later that day, there was a guy that contacted me on LinkedIn because it was my birthday a couple days later. He said, "Happy birthday. By the way, I enjoyed your sparrow video." So I shot a video that day about the value of a sparrow, all that kind of stuff. Now, that story sounds average until you realize that guy is an atheist. It's a guy I went to high school with. He's an atheist, full-blown atheist. He'll tell you he's happy to do that, doesn't like Christians, that whole thing. Here's this guy that I'm not trying to reach him, but he saw my little silly, goofy video about what is a sparrow worth. And in the end, I said, God cares about you. He knows the hairs on your head. He knows everything about a sparrow. Sparrows are worth nothing. He knows all about them. Think how much more valuable you are. I said all that kind of stuff, and it went into the ears of an atheist. How cool is that? And that's the story, just silly little things. So yeah, I encourage you to tell stories, just keep them short.
My other thing that I would just throw out really quick is Carl and his team helped me last week. It was our missions week. And so I was trying to figure out how we can celebrate and show how we're on the move. People need encouragement. They just don't need to know that we're in the midst of this. We trust in God's faithfulness, but in the midst of this, God is still good and he's still doing great things. And so we use the song Great Things as an opener, and we went into What a Beautiful Name. And what I just decided to do, I love hearing the gospel shared in multiple languages. I love hearing multiple tongues. And we're not a very diverse church with multiple, but we have various groups that are around us that we've been trying to figure out how do we leverage, how do we minister to them that we don't have to do an entire service. And so we took What a Beautiful Name and I transcribed it in 7 different languages that my team sang in. So we used Portuguese, we used Creole, we used German, we used Ga from Ghana. So there's just multiple different things that were really meaningful just to us. And in a time where if we're just really real, when we're in the room, people are singing with us, and maybe in your church, the room is so loud that you can't really hear the people. But one of the things I love is to be able to cut the band and to hear the congregation singing out. but I understand that not every person sings. So in a time when we have a video or we're using Facebook Live, it was meaningful to people just to say that song ministered to me profoundly because it was in another language where they saw the English, but they saw the other language. It ministered to them in a total different perspective. And so I would just challenge you that you can use other languages in ways that maybe you haven't used before, but also it's a time that we're not a very, like, the gospel is liturgy. And so as we shared liturgy, but we're not like high liturgy. But I found that also doing like congregational scripture to allow people to read with us, to read in their home, that we saw engagement with that. And so worship is way more than just the songs that we sing. It's the life that we live. It's the stories that we tell. And I've just found that in this time, that yesterday ministered to me profoundly, that we gave people a new outlet, but we also showed them how we're still going and being the church in this time. And then just in our opening loop, we just remind people, I found that as we share pictures of us being together in our services, and we put things like, in this season, let's be the church. You're not alone, that it reminds people that we're in this together, and it gives them that sense of belonging that they're asking for.
So Steve just put the link to the video that we created, one of the choir videos that we did for DeAndre's church, in the chat there, so that you can see that. It's the Dropbox link for it. And it's also it was your missions Sunday. So you incorporated that. It was really cool, man. All right. So as we wrap today, Dr. J, I would love for you to speak at the topic of clear direction. So maybe how, as leaders, we can be clear with our team, with our support staff, with our volunteers, with how we're communicating. How can we give clear direction?
Wow. Again, I love how you toss these just simple little questions my way. I got like 30 seconds to cover that.
I know. I'm giving you the hardball questions, man. Sorry.
Hey, I want to pause though, just to encourage you before I answer that. While I was sitting there listening to this, I so admire how seriously you take your job, and the fact that you're literally serving the Lord himself in being so deliberate about choosing the songs and choosing things that are going to speak to people's fears and their needs. As a church goer, I'm so grateful that the pastors that are caring for me take it that seriously too. But I also wanted to encourage you that not to take it any less seriously, but to also rest on the fact that you're his instrument, and that you're not going to go wrong. You know, if I could put it this way, I think back when, well, if people come to church because the Lord's prepared their hearts, in other words, that they're fertile ground to begin with, then they're going to find what they need in the worship that's there, because it's the Lord that's using that to speak to them. And it doesn't take anything away from your responsibility that you're serving well. I just want to reaffirm for you that as his instrument, he's preparing people, and they're finding what they're needing. In fact, this is a silly example, but if you ever broke up with a girl or a guy, you know, when you were younger or anything like that, I don't know if you had this experience, but it's like the moment I broke up, it seemed like every song on the radio had been written just to me. Okay, I see a few of you nodding. You get it, right? Of course, the songs were there all along. The difference was that sort of emotional posture I brought to it, right? And I was going to find what I was looking for. And I think if that can happen in a situation like that, it is certainly not beyond our Father to orient these things. And if he's preparing our hearts, you guys are being faithful and beyond faithful. And I think that folks are going to find what they need there, because it's the Lord that's using your efforts. I just want to try to encourage you with that. But anyway, about giving clear direction, I think of all the different things that I could throw out there. Let me just throw out this one for this peculiar time. During a crisis situation, one of the things that happens is priorities get all mixed up. And one of the most important foundations to clear direction is that people understand the the priorities, like the what's most important, because they're going to have to make a lot of choices about where they spend their time and their attention, their energy. And so as a leader, we have to give them a sense of what's most important. Oddly enough, in leadership, we neglect that more than most things. We hurry on to talk about the what and the how of things that have to happen, but we forget to talk about the why, or which things serve the why the best. And so let me just encourage you during this season, kind of two things that go hand in hand about priorities. One is that it's not business as usual. I interact with some leaders that are like, I think they're trying to show how determined they are. So they're like saying, even in spite of this challenge, we're going to keep everything the same. We're going to keep all of our goals, all of the things we want to achieve, what we're planning to do this year. We're going to stick to all those. We're just going to manage to do it somehow in spite of this impact. And that is something heroic and determined about that. But I think it's also misguided when it comes to giving clear direction. This is a big enough thing. It's not just a minor thing. It's not going to go away soon. So it's not business as usual. And for a leader, that means that you need to quickly accept that and tell people what's changed. If you don't give direction about what is now different, you'll find yourself inadvertently just adding more priorities to all those other priorities, or getting people to do something else in addition to the other things that you're really hoping for from them. Even if that's not what you meant, that's how people will feel, and they'll quickly lose their way of, wait, what's most important? So on one hand, it's about saying, reprioritizing in this time, and then making those priorities clear in your direction. And honestly, I challenge you to do this with your team. It might be worth identifying the things that are now going to be subordinated to something else, the things that you're going to neglect in favor for something else. Because usually during this time, some of the things, like if we went back 6 months ago, some of the things you would have said are going to be the most important things and trump other things are now in another order, or something else needs to be articulated that it needs to be achieved. So I just want to encourage you during this crazy time to take a close look at your priorities, and don't be afraid to reprioritize, and then really clarify for people that when the smoke clears, even if we haven't achieved X, Y, and Z, we want to make sure we've achieved this thing. Does that make any sense to you all?
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good, man. God, you're so good. Awesome. Well, as we wrap today, Doug, you want to kind of round us out and pray us out today? Is there any and you guys feel free to speak up if you have any questions, or as Doug kind of wraps us today.
Going once, going twice. All right, let's pray. God, I thank you for today. I thank you for all the people that are represented on this call. Thank you for their creativity and their hearts to serve you. God, I especially thank you that you are still sovereign. You are still on your throne. You're still in control. You still know what's going on. You precede us. You follow us. You go before us. You come behind us. I pray that that could be comforting to everyone on this call. I pray that you will give us wisdom as we lead our churches and our teams and just the world that you've given us influence over, however big or how small that world is for us. Just help us to lead well and ultimately lead people to you. So thank you for this day. Just encourage us and help us as we prepare for this weekend. I pray that we can do good things for your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, you guys have a great week. Thank you so much for hanging out. We love you guys. And if we can do anything, feel free to reach out. Have a good one.